I was married but ended up separating from my wife due to my own substance abuse issues, mainly with alcohol. At one point during the separation, we didn't talk for almost 2 months. During that time, I landed a great job, was able to buy a new car, and was really turning some things around. Then one day, she called me out of the blue and she wanted to meet up, so we met in an IHOP for breakfast. It was August and she was wearing a hoodie, which I found really odd. After we sat down, she proceeded to tell me that she wanted to tell me about all the things that she was doing. It turns out that she had started using and became addicted to heroin. One night, she overdosed and was found by a neighbor unconscious on the floor. They called 911 and an ambulance and police came, and the police searched her apartment, finding heroin and other paraphernalia. After she was released from the hospital, she was taken to jail and charged. Her parents, who were extremely well off, got a good attorney and she pled out, getting only probation and in order to attend outpatient rehab. Needless to say, I was upset and disappointed about all of this. We had done other substances together in the past, but we had both agreed that cocaine and heroin were the two things we would never do because of how dangerous they are. About 2 months into her probation and rehab, she was tested randomly, and she pissed dirty for heroin. She was taken back to jail, bonded out, and went back to court. Her lawyer negotiated a deal to keep her out of jail, but required her to attend a 30-day inpatient rehab facility. During all of this, she, pressured by her parents, decided our marriage was irreparable. We got a divorce in January of 2012. We still kept in touch, though. The rehab seemed to do her good at first, but once she got really clean, about halfway through it, she turned into a huge asshole. She would call or text me saying really degrading things, and eventually she stopped, and I never heard from her again. Due to the divorce and my own mental health issues, I was struggling worse than ever with substance abuse. I was drinking heavily every day and abusing Adderall and Klonopin. Last June, under the influence of a lot of alcohol and drugs, I lost my balance and fell through a plate glass-topped coffee table. The glass completely shattered and a large piece lodged itself into my shoulder. As I learned at the hospital later, it nicked my carotid artery. I had to call 911 and was rushed to the hospital where I received 46 stitches, and I was told that if the glass had gone in half an inch further, I probably would have bled to death. Just the next month, I was again hospitalized after I began hearing things due to being up for 3 days straight on Adderall and probated for 9 days. I had to attend a court hearing and basically convince a judge that I was capable of taking care of myself and living on my own. I bullshitted my way through the entire thing and was released from the hospital. I got on medication for bipolar disorder and began seeing a social worker and counselor twice a month. I stayed clean for a while and would text my ex about it to let her know how I was doing, but I never got a response. It pissed me off, honestly. A few months ago I began to drink again, as well as abusing more Adderall and Klonopin and smoking weed. I could see myself sinking fast. A couple of weeks ago, after talking to my parents, I decided I needed help and checked myself into the emergency room, attempting to be admitted to the psych ward or referred to a rehab facility or something. They refused to do either because I was drunk as hell and released me instead. They only kept me for about 4 hours, giving me an IV fluid to rehydrate me. When I got home, I texted my ex and told her I was planning on checking myself into a rehab facility. Again, no response. I figured she would have been proud of me for doing the right thing. 2 nights ago, I found out why she hadn't been responding, though. I looked her up on Facebook as I knew she had an account, but nothing came up for her. I found that really strange, so I googled her name and the first result was an obituary. She had died from a heroin overdose in her parents' basement in October of last year. Even though we were divorced, I never stopped loving her, so I pretty much lost it and began crying. After regaining my composure, it hit me. While I may not be doing heroin, the Adderall and Klonopin abuse could be just as dangerous. I could take too many of one, or a lethal combination of two, and die, and since I live alone, no one would find me for days. As much as I abuse them, I've been extremely lucky up until this point, even though I've been put on a 72-hour hold in the hospital twice for overdosing on Adderall and flipping out. So, I took both of my pill bottles into the bathroom and flushed the contents of them down the toilet. Today, I called my doctor who had been prescribing them to me and admitted to what I had been doing and asked them to stop. I've resolved to never drink or smoke weed ever again, and I'm researching Narcotics Anonymous meetings that are close to my house, and I'll start attending them at least once a week. I'm absolutely heartbroken over my ex-wife's death. She was only 30 years old, had moved back with her family, and seemed like she was on a good road to recovery. Part of me, though, is mad that no one called and told me about her passing. It would have been fine if they didn't want me at the funeral, but a phone call would have been nice at least. Yeah, we were divorced, but we were together for almost 11 years. We started dating when we were only 19. I was a huge part of her life, and when I told my parents about this yesterday, they were shocked that no one had called me. Another part of me is upset because she had told me, when we met up for breakfast that day after she OD'd, that she started doing heroin because I was doing so well at the time, and she, quote, felt like she deserved to feel good too, in a roundabout way, blaming me. I'm sure she shared that with her parents, who never liked me to begin with, so I wonder if they hold even more of a grudge against me in the light of her death. I thought for an hour straight earlier today about calling them, but after talking to my dad, I've decided against it. I'm not going to get anything out of it, and it's only going to upset them and open up the wound I'm sure they have, and probably still are working extremely hard to heal. I do know where she's buried though, and this weekend I'm going to buy some flowers and place them on her grave with a little note, so that anyone who comes to visit her will know I was there. Drugs and alcohol have cost me a $50,000 a year job, my aforementioned new car, almost all of my friends, my marriage, and have landed me in the hospital numerous times. Yet I basically flipped fate a big old middle finger and kept at it anyway. Now that I know drugs have taken the person that I was closer to than anyone else in my life, my eyes have finally been opened. I'm done. I wish I would have known this sooner and had this eye-opening experience a year ago, but despite the sadness I'm feeling right now, I'm filled with hope of having a happy, healthy, and substance-free future. I was about 11 when my maternal grandmother told me this. We lived on a farm then, and the school I attended was about a mile-long walk through the town to their house. I was normally a happy child, so when I walked through the door a bit mopey, Grandma implemented the cure that nearly always worked. She took me into the kitchen where she prepared hot chocolate and cookies, and then waited. About halfway through my hot chocolate, I said, "I thought this girl at school liked me, but I don't think she does. She said something mean today." I let that sink in and added the punchline. "I don't think anyone at school likes me." Grandma listened patiently while she sipped her coffee. When she replaced the cup on the saucer, I knew she was going to give me her sage advice. "Toddy," Grandma often called me Toddy instead of Kathy. "Toddy, a few people will really like me and be my friend. There may be one or two people who may not like me, but the vast majority of people won't care one way or the other about me. They may say hello and notice what I'm wearing, but as soon as I'm out of sight, they'll forget me entirely." Even at 11, I understood what she meant. Some people will really like you, one or two won't like you, but the vast majority of people don't care about you one way or the other. It's just human nature, so the idea that everyone doesn't like you is false. Just because someone walks past you and doesn't speak, it doesn't mean they don't like you. It may just mean they're preoccupied or something. Sometimes people may be a bit snippy with you. If they think you've done something wrong, then they're just taking their bad day out on you and it has nothing to do with you personally. I've tried to remember that when something unpleasant happens. If I've done nothing to warrant someone being a bit sharp with me, then I chalk it up to something that's happened with them that has nothing to do with me. I was raised with family values. Getting married was important, following lessons and laws in the Bible was absolutely necessary for a good life. Things changed when my mother became an alcoholic, though. She was a bored housewife who drank a bottle of wine each night and made her teenage children laugh by acting goofy or walking around in my dad's underwear. She didn't hurt or bother anyone physically, though. If she got up at noon, it didn't matter. She had teenagers who could care for themselves and get to school on time. By the time we all went off to school or moved out, my mother was drunk by 3 p.m. in the afternoon every day. If you questioned her, she'd swear she hadn't had a glass of wine in over a week. She would argue loudly and engage in a dramatic, unconvincing act of denial. Not one of my 2 siblings still living at home had the heart to express their concerns. They ignored her inebriated showcases or just laughed. My twin sister reasoned, "She's not hurting anyone, it's her life. Let her do what makes her happy." In hindsight, that twin of mine was a smart cookie. Mom soon hid bottles of vodka under her bed and in the closet. Being incredibly empathetic, I couldn't understand why she was drinking and would ask her why. I loved my mom and wanted to help her. Later, I realized my truthful observations and overly caring disposition would set me up for some major family abuse. Please know that my dad was an older, handsome man, a good provider, the best father in the world, and adored my beautiful mother. He paid for everything, and she drove a nice sedan. I accidentally discovered his Viagra, so I'm sure he was pleasing his lovely alcoholic housewife in the bedroom, too. Because I loved my mom, I was the daughter that would pull her aside and talk to her about getting some help. She laughed in my face. I prayed for her every day. Big mistake. As time edged on, my sisters would always go to the local liquor store and buy her some cheap Gallo wine, cigarettes, and a Diet Pepsi whenever they visited. Now that made her happy. She had a delightful red gum smile and a glowing reddened flushed face at the sight of any alcohol. Things really changed when my father had a stroke. A few days before, he fell and hit his head. Being a speech pathologist, I urged my mother to take him to the ER to rule out any brain bleed or the presence of a transient ischemic attack, or TIA. This would warn her of any impending larger cerebral vascular accident, or CVA. She minimized it and laughed at me in her drunken voice, declaring, "He's fine." The next day, he had a massive left-sided paralysis. He had a severe tongue deviation with open mouth posture, talked gibberish, and could not maintain alertness. I, the truth teller, had been right. I believe the neurologist said, quote, "a massive watershed stroke." I knew what that meant. The severity was so bad that the rehabilitation would be minimal, and he was permanently damaged. In addition, it was written in my father's medical chart that my mother had told the ER nurse that she found him, quote, "droopy" the night before and wanted to see if he would just get better after a good night's sleep. Thus, she waited until noon the next day to bring him in. Unknowingly, my alcoholic mother had made sure her hubby was not a TPA candidate, which is greater than 75% successful at dissolving clots in the first 12 hours after a stroke. To make a long story short, I'm sure Mom was freaked that I would tell my siblings, my dad's brothers, sisters, cousins, or family friends about this. So what does the alcoholic mother do? She scapegoated me immediately and badmouthed me horribly behind my back. I didn't know what was going on. My young daughter and I were excluded from family events, Thanksgiving gatherings, even funerals. My brother, 2 sisters, and 2 half-sisters were all suddenly estranged from me. My half-sisters even announced that I was on drugs, and my older sister told everyone that I was bipolar and had no social skills. I now understand that she was saying I was autistic too. Everyone bullied me and were overtly rude if I reached out. I thought I was going crazy. Meanwhile, I initially did everything I could to help my mother care for my paralyzed, massively cognitively impaired father at home. I wanted to help because I loved both of my parents. My mother let me spend my little savings on paying for bed pads, antibacterial wipes, undergarments, and medical and cleaning supplies. I have Costco receipts as proof. My mother never said thank you and would drunkenly retreat back into her bedroom. Many times I overheard her speak to her sister in German that I was abusing her and my father. It just wasn't true. I was always quietly trying to help. I even saved a letter from my aunt scolding me that I should respect my mother and stop being so shameful to the family. What was my mom saying? I really did think I was going crazy. Not one of my other siblings helped either, and 2 of them had husbands that paid for all of their bills. I even stayed alone with my dad for 9 days while my mother visited her, quote, golden child in Atlanta for Christmas. I took my dad outside in his wheelchair for a walk, and even the neighbors ignored my greetings. Nobody called to wish us a Merry Christmas, and when I called on Christmas Eve, I was quickly dismissed. Back then, I was a single working parent. Because I still didn't know what was happening, I was always kind and respectful to that bitch. A few years later, I learned from my cousins my mother was calling every family member and smearing my reputation on a monthly basis with salacious narratives. I wasn't invited to my beloved uncle's funeral because my mom told everybody, quote, "Karen will cause drama. She's bipolar." She even said I was so promiscuous that I couldn't keep a boyfriend. Have you ever tried to date while working full-time to raise an adolescent daughter? It's really just not a priority to me. So, I went to counseling, and I saw a psychiatrist. Was I really bipolar? I didn't feel bipolar, but I was angry and confused that I was suddenly the family outcast. My psychiatrist contacted workmates, neighbors, and friends. The The psychologist called other family members to get a picture of who I was. They worked together. It was expensive. Soon, I learned about the roles children play to their alcoholic parents. My older sister Heidi was her golden child. My twin, Eno, was the lost child. Our friend/brother David was the clown. And guess who was the scapegoat? You guessed it, yours truly. I was put on an antidepressant called Zoloft that worked wonders. I'm not a pop psychology type person, but please understand that these roles and patterns that alcoholics assign to their offspring are true. It's very powerful, evil, and damaging. I quickly learned how I had been repeatedly gaslighted by my own family, the flying monkeys from Mommy Dearest. I learned that I wasn't bipolar and actually a very vulnerable, mentally and emotionally abused woman for the last 17 years of my life. I paid a lot of money to cry, be validated, and to make sense of a very confusing situation. Luckily, I didn't let any of this affect me professionally. By the time I got counseling, my daughter was already in college. And how could I escape the role of the scapegoat? I wanted this to end so bad. The solution? Absolutely no contact with my own mother. The one who I was supposed to trust and who brought me into this world had betrayed me at a grand level. The psychiatrist and psychologist assured me that this was the only way. So there went my family values out the window. I value my own mental health more than trying to save a relationship with a lying, abusive mother. No contact has helped me grow and heal from this insidious abuse called scapegoating. I have great friends now, and they share their families with me. My daughter gets it as we've grown closer. P.S. Please Google scapegoating abuse for more information. I was a single mom going to school, judging classes, raising my son, working 2 part-time jobs, and being the program manager at the campus radio station. It sounds crazy, but I was too young and too full of energy and optimism to stop going. Then, in just a 6-month time span, things happened out of the blue that changed my life and the life of my son forever. We tend to blame ourselves when bad things happen, and I do take responsibility for how blind I was, but I can never take responsibility for another person's thoughts or actions. Every day was a busy day, and weekends were no different. I had studying and my part-time jobs. During the week, daycare and friends helped with my son, though many times he would fall asleep underneath the cash register at the copy shop where I worked. But weekends? That was his time to spend with Grandma and Grandpa. It should have been the most precious of memories. Granted, my mom was never a nice person. She was abusive towards me physically, mentally, and emotionally for my entire childhood. My siblings did not receive the same treatment from her. But when I married, and eventually divorced, she seemed to soften a little, especially when my son was born. She appeared to treat him with a silver glove. He appeared to be the apple of her eye. I slowly allowed the anger I'd always felt toward her melt away as I saw the budding relationship she had with my son. That was the biggest mistake of my life, and that decision changed everything. One Friday evening, I was driving my son to spend the weekend with my folks, only he was withdrawn. The closer we got to their home, the more anxious he became, and he was only 4 years old. I pulled to the side of the road and gently coaxed him to tell me what was wrong. Fearfully, he proceeded to tell me how my 14-year-old male cousin who lived just down the road had enjoyed having my son perform oral sex on him. All the rage I'd buried came to the surface with the force of a hurricane. I didn't know what to do. I only knew how much I loved my little boy and how I wanted to protect him, and I knew I wanted my cousin to suffer and pay for what he had done. Caught up in the emotions of the moment, I did what most adult children likely would have done because I literally didn't know where else to turn or who to go to for help. My mom worked at the sheriff's office for several years. It seemed logical at the time that she would know what to do. I knew that it would take more than the legalities to help my son. He would need some sort of professional help so he could cope and move on to live a full and happy life. I told her everything, and she appeared to be in shock and appeared to be very distressed and distraught. I understood that reaction as I was still reeling in the reality of what my son had gone through. Was it because I desperately wanted my mom to love me and protect me too? Was it because I was naive enough to believe her when she said that she would take care of everything? Was it because I had built up a fantasy where my mom was like other moms who love their children and grandchildren? To this day, I blame myself for everything that happened after this point. I could have made a different decision, but instead I made a weak decision, a wrong decision. Don't ask me why, because I don't know, but I thought the distraught voice and teary eyes meant my mom was really going to take care of everything. She convinced me to go to work and leave my son with her. She convinced me that by doing so, he would be left in loving, caring hands that would defend him and make things right. I believed her. I was a fool. This changed my life forever. I should have expected the outcome. Perhaps I was blinded by my guilt. Who knows? The only thing I do know is that when I returned the next day to get my son, he was sitting on the couch with his molester right next to him. My cousin had his hand on my son's thigh and was slowly sliding his hand up and down my son's leg. My mother had called in her immediate family. When I walked in, it literally felt like death was in the air. Everyone just stared at me. I don't know how many minutes went by, but I remember looking at my son and seeing my cousin's hand gliding up and down, as if in a taunt and daring me to challenge him. I was frozen, speechless. The stillness of the room suddenly broke when my mother announced, "Everything is fine. We're going to pretend like nothing ever happened. You can look at your son and see he's fine. Just let it go and do as I say." It seemed like the room was both spinning and standing still at the same time. I fell down to one knee and outstretched my arms. I told my son, "Come here, baby." He ran over to me so fast, he almost knocked me over in his effort to be freed from his hell. I picked him up and walked to my car. Everyone followed. It was eerie, like something out of a horror movie. I said to everyone, "I will never speak to any of you ever again. You will never be around my son again." To which my mother slowly replied with a smirk, "You'll be back." I didn't respond. We got in the car and drove away. I promised my son I would never let anything like that ever happen to him again, and that I would always protect him and keep him safe. Within a week, I had my son tell the police what had happened to him. Over the course of the next few months, I was impregnated, lost a baby, had a noose hung on my door, dropped out of college, lost both of my jobs and the radio gig, and moved to a different city completely. And my son's birth father told him as far as he was concerned, my son was dead to him and that he never wanted to see him or talk to him again. It's been over 30 years and we never looked back. My son's dad kept his word and he has never attempted to make contact with my son. My mother has never attempted to make contact with me or my son either. My aunt, the 14-year-old's mom, called my unlisted number once to tell me how wrong I was and that her son is gay, which, according to her, justifies what he did to my son. I've never written any of this down before, and quite frankly, I don't know how to close. After all the therapy, all the tears, and all the heartache, I've learned that I can't go back in time and change things. And I've also learned that my son, who is now an adult, is responsible for his life despite everything. I've also learned that, quote, breaking the chain is a myth. I know from experience that each of us is a link in that chain, and we can repair our own link, but the chain of the abuse itself can only be broken if everyone in the family sees a problem. It's been my experience that most members of my family unit live life blindly. Perhaps that helps them sleep better at night. My first death in the ICU during my residency, which was many years ago, was a young student who was hit by a car while crossing the street. I did his brain death exam and touched his very thick, very black hair. I thought to myself, his hair will never go gray. This was it for him. It hit me hard that his life was over when mine was just starting. So now, when I see things like gray hairs, stretch marks from my pregnancies, or other signs of age on my body, I actually like it. I'm grateful that life has given me this, and that I've been blessed with this time on Earth to experience it. My roommate at university was a cool guy. He played video games, studied hard, and had a good sense of humor. We went out for lunch a lot, and he would offer to just pay for me. He was a really generous guy. One morning, though, he jumped off my residence building. We lived on the top floor of a 20-story building. He broke a window open and just jumped. I found out about it as I was on my way back from class. Police officers were all around the building. It changed my life. Life is so precious. One day you're here, next day you're gone. On my way to class the next day, I overheard other students laughing about it. Depression is very real, and it's infuriating that there's still stigma associated with it in this day and age. I was an angry teen with a constant chip on my shoulder. Everything was wrong with the world and it pissed me off. I also had this tough guy take no shit from anyone attitude. One day, my cousin from out of town, who I had not seen in years, came to visit. He was happy-go-lucky, very charming, and complimentary of others. He didn't take himself too seriously and was even a little bit self-deprecating, and everyone loved him. Everyone wanted to be around him, and everyone seemed to be happy around him too. Most of all, he seemed happy with himself and very comfortable in his own skin. I reevaluated who I wanted to be after that. I readjusted my attitude from negative to positive and have never looked back. It's amazing how the little things you do, like small compliments, improves the moods of others. And it's even more amazing to observe that that mood is contagious. It's easier to be happy when everyone around you is happy too. I went to live in Australia with a longtime girlfriend. The plan was to live together until we got on our feet. I sold everything to make it happen and moved there, and since I was allowed to work, I figured I would have no problem making it work. We broke up while I was there. It wasn't a great one. As such, I had no place to live. I stayed in hostels for a while with the tiny bit of money I had left while I searched for places to work. My stuff hadn't even arrived yet from where I moved from, and I was basically living off sub $500. I hustled my butt off and found some yard work under the table I could do, along with doing a medical study while I looked for work. It kept me able to get food and stay alive. I got a job with a temp place and moved into a shady shared place that was super cheap while I got back on my feet. Needless to say, lesson learned. Don't go by the seat of your pants for love or for anything. It's best to plan ahead. This was a long time ago. I went back to Australia many years later with $400K under my belt and really saw the country and the beauty that was there instead of looking over my shoulder the entire time and worrying if I had enough money to stay off the streets. I was at a mall and was walking from my car toward the entrance. As I was passing the designated parking spots for people with disabilities, I saw a man approach a woman getting out of her SUV. The man was really loud and really aggressive. He said, "You can't fucking park here. These spots are for the handicapped." She replied, "I have a disabled person parking permit." He got even louder and said, "That's total bullshit. You have to have the handicapped person with you to be able to park here. You can't just use it to get spots close to the door. It's for people who actually need them." The woman was really calm and said, "I have lung cancer. The disabled permit is mine." The guy just froze and then said, I'm really sorry, I had no idea. I learned that you never know what you're dealing with based on appearances. People walking around in everyday life could have way more on their shoulders than we realize. It's made me more patient with people and a lot less judgmental. I lost an extremely well-paying manufacturing job due to downsizing a few years ago, and it terrified me. Starting pay at every other plant in the area was well under half of what I was making then, and now I was barely able to put food on the family table. It terrified me that this would continue to happen for the rest of my career in manufacturing. I was a slacker by every definition, always doing the bare minimum, worked harder at getting out of work than actually doing it, and never looked towards any advancement or improvements. Sitting at home, no hot water, no food in the fridge, kids wearing shoes and clothes that had been given to us because we couldn't afford them, and watching my wife leave for her minimum wage job as my unemployment slowly ran out, I realized that I couldn't spend the rest of my life like this, and I went back to school. 7 years later, I'm about to finish my MBA, and I make almost double of what I did in that good job listed above. I also have a lot more security that even if I lose my job today, it won't take long to find something else. Possibly even something better. It was a fine morning, very pleasant weather. As usual, I got up and ready for college. Hopped on my bike and I was on my way. I had just started to take my bike to college. I was traveling at a normal speed of about 40 kilometers an hour, which is a very normal speed on a BT road, which is like a highway, when suddenly a speeding bus hit my bike, first on the rear of my bike. I almost lost my balance. Then the bus's rear hit my bike's handle, and then instantaneously my bike started rotating and I was thrown forward. At this point, I realized that my game is over forever. For 2 to 3 seconds I was airborne, and I fell like a projectile on the road, and then out of the momentum my body was rolling and skidding on the road too. I could feel my arm skin rubbing against the asphalt. Everything happened so quickly, and I was totally out of control. During those 15 to 20 seconds, the time I was in the air and when my body was rolling on the road, I knew it as a matter of a fact that a bus or truck which must have been behind me will crush me and I'll be dead. A few thoughts raced through my mind in those few seconds when I knew I was gonna die. Number 1, dying in an accident was one of the worst ends to a person's life, a complete waste. I regretted not taking enough risk, not showing bravery in some occasions, not telling my mother how much I loved her, not telling my friends how much they mattered to me, and I also regretted not beating up some assholes. Number 2, I just wished I could have met certain people one last time, especially the girl I was madly in love with. I wanted to at least kiss her before I died. It felt terrible that I was going to die so young. But then, after my body stopped skidding and rolling, I was lying there for a few seconds waiting for some vehicle to crush me. But destiny wanted me to live more. I tried to get up and I had assumed that maybe some of my bones would be broken, but I was in one piece. Just some blood was coming out of my arms and my thigh felt jammed. But I got up myself and started walking. There were no major injuries. I decided then and there I was not going to leave anything for tomorrow and live life to the fullest every day. From that day, I always assume every day to be the last, and I had to make sure that this time when I die, I don't have the same regrets. After this, I would do a lot more work every day, not keep anything for tomorrow. I would spot on tell you if I liked something or hated it, and I would readily take up any daring or challenging task. Someone asked me if I told this incident to my mom. No, I did not, and it was the most difficult part. When I returned home, I told her that my bike skidded a bit. This much I had to tell because there was a bandage over my right arm. The injury to my leg was hidden by trousers. The chest injury was not visible either. I used to hide all painkillers, cream, and medicines in my bag. For 1 week I was limping, so I would just not walk in front of my mom or dad. For 1 month I used to feel a lot of pain in lifting things. Whenever there was some heavy lifting work in the house, like furniture moving, I had to do it in extreme pain, and if I refused, Mom would get a hint that something was wrong. Wearing a helmet saved my life. I have this cousin who I didn't know even existed until very recently. She's my 3rd or 4th cousin, I'm not sure. She was a bright young child who was keenly interested in her studies, unlike me. She also happened to be about 7 years younger than me. Her parents were desperately trying to have a boy since they already had 2 girls when she was born. Other than that, she had very poor eyesight. A burden, naturally. She was sent to live with her aunt who adopted her and raised her like her own daughter. One day, I was dejected with studies and had absolutely no motivation to work hard. My mom gets a call. Turns out this cousin of mine was rushed to the hospital. There was some complication with her eyesight. She was 9. With some help, she was sent to Ames, which is like the best hospital in India to seek medical help. She was losing her eyesight at an alarming rate. She had already gone through 4 extremely painful surgeries for her eyesight, and another one was suggested. She went blind at the age of 9. My mother went to visit her in the hospital and told me about how much she was weeping and complaining about how much it hurts. I had no idea she even existed until my mother got a call. How could it have affected me so much? I remember locking myself in my room and silently crying. I mean, she's only 9. How is this even fair? She had her whole life and future ahead of her. How could it just be snatched away from her just like that? I mean, I complained about my mother not letting me watch some football match when somebody who happened to be my cousin lost her eyesight. It affected me. It really did, in ways I couldn't even imagine. I realized how lucky I am. I have amazing parents, I go to an amazing school, and most importantly, I have eyes. I realized how silly my problems are, and I admire her for being so brave. Recently, I found out that she's in a blind school, and she's also learned how to read and write in Braille, which is very impressive. She does not complain about it at all.